And Monday morning, I woke up early, flipped up my laptop in my chair with a cup of coffee, and wrote like 8,000 words that day. And over the course of that week, I think I wrote 20 or 25 hours, and that became the book.
I always used to tell my team that I think that people who say creativity is thinking outside the box is a cop-out. I think that's the easy way. I think the better way to explain what it would be like to operate in Target's environment or inside the insurance industry would be to say that rather than thinking outside the box, creativity is staying inside the confines of the rules that we're required to follow, but finding a new and different way to do something.
I mean, I just graduated and I wanted to be a graphic designer. So after a while, I gave it a leap of faith. A couple weeks it gave me to think about it. And, not to be overly cliche, but that's really the rest is history. I mean, that's how I got into the insurance industry and spent so many years at Westfield doing a lot of things. But the last decade or so, I was deeply involved in helping lead distribution management activities.
My next book, I've been fairly vocal about it, is actually a daily sales reader for producers. It'll have 365, just vignettes. You can go in, here's a challenging thing to think about for the day, but I've been writing it in real time.
The great thing about art, or, in this case, music, is that you can sing one song to 100,000 people and they will sing it back to you for 100,000 different reasons.
I tell people all the time when I discuss content creation with them, just even if you're doing digital advertising to build brand awareness or whatever, if for yourself as a producer or for your agency, write from the heart, be consistent in putting out content, and your audience will always find you no matter what. If you're just consistent and you keep putting things out there, the people that are supposed to find you will.
And somewhere along the way, it hit me that we can be the inertia of our own legacy. And that's really where the idea came. But I didn't really think about it as a book. To me, it was just this idea that was bouncing around in my head.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast. Man, I got to dust this thing off a little bit. Since we've been batch recording, I got to be honest, I took a few weeks off around the holidays, and this is the first time we are recording in 2025, and it feels great. So got a feeling we're going to have some high energy, but I got to learn my way back around a little bit. So be patient with me as we get through this. But I got a good guest on, somebody that's strong, somebody that definitely has a good message that I think everybody should hear. And that is Chris Cline. And he is the author of The Inertia of Legacy, which is a book that he published. I want to say, was it 24? It was late 23 that you published it. I feel like it's been around a couple of years now, but we're going to talk to him and what that book's about, what it means to you, and then how you can engage with Chris to learn more about some of the things that he's doing regarding that. So Chris, welcome, man. Glad to have you on for the first time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I deeply appreciate it. But you're right. Yeah, October 23 is when the book came out, and it's kind of had ups and downs, right? It's been 15, 16 months. So it's exciting. And I was really, really stoked to have a chance to kind of spend some time with you, David. I know we've crossed paths and airports and between speakers lounges at industry events around the country over the last couple of years. So as much as it's going to be cool to talk about the book and share the message, I'm just looking forward to shooting a breeze with you for
thanks,
30,
man.
45 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So quickly, I mean, a lot of people have probably heard you on other podcasts. I'm not going to presume that I'm the only podcast people listen to, right? So I don't want you to spend a ton of time because I want to focus on the book, but just why don't you give everybody just a little bit of background to who you are in kind of what led you up to writing the book to begin with, and we'll dig in from there.
Yeah, sounds good. I appreciate it. So I all my life in the insurance industry, but like so many people, have that story where they kind of just accidentally ended up there. But just super abbreviated version, which admittedly is a continual lifelong developmental opportunity. Brevity is not a strength of mine. So keep me on track, David. But I'm a fine art major. I went to school to be a graphic designer, which wasn't even the intention. And we can talk about that in the book because it's kind of a pivotal moment. But ultimately ended up with my degree in graphic design, and like so many people right out of school, you're just trying to find a job and figure out a place to go make a living, and had the opportunity by way of a faculty advisor who was helping me figure out things to think about with what the career could look like. And she had a relationship with a person who was doing some part-time teaching at the university in the graphic space, who was the manager of a graphics and advertising department at an insurance company and wanted to know if to make the connection. So dumb luck ended up with an internship at Westfield Insurance
Hmm.
and in a graphics department. And so in that era, the company had a fully functional printing facility, fully staffed graphic design studio, and did so many things in-house, and even offered those services to agents that worked with them. So pretty cool. And I was just off and running. I was excited to work for a big company and have the opportunity to learn. But very shortly thereafter, had an opportunity to enter the insurance side of things. In fact, the senior team I was reporting to had one of those calls that kind of scares you when you're young, but it's, hey, can you come over? We'd like to talk to you a little bit. Come up to our office, so to speak. And those were the days when everybody wore a suit. So I put on my sport coat and everything and went up. But um, the gist of that was I didn't work for an ad agency, but they were excited about the work I was doing and the enthusiasm I brought and their words, the way I thought about things. Wanted to know if I wanted to jump off the graphic design path and join the insurance industry and go through a training program and become a part of the marketing department, which was at the time was in the product org. And I thought that about it. I thought about it for quite a while because I mean I was pretty fresh. I mean I just graduated and I wanted to be a graphic designer. So after a while, I gave it a leap of faith. A couple weeks they gave me to think about it, and not to be overly cliche, but that's really the rest is history. I mean, that's how I got into the insurance industry and spent so many years at Westfield doing a lot of things. But the last decade or so, I was deeply involved in helping lead distribution management activities. And that body of work happened during really when InsurTech became a thing in our industry. And I just leaned into it. I'm fascinated about the future. I'm fascinated about vision and strategy and ideating about what can be. And I just started to get connected to people along the way. And that's how I met so many of our mutual friends. And it was ultimately how I ended up where I am today, which is at the Big I leading the Agents Council for Technology. Um, my predecessor, Ron Berg, had started to plan his retirement, and the Big I asked, help us find your successor. And
Hmm.
Ron spent, I don't know, probably 6 months texting me and calling me and trying to give me enough reason to make a move after so many years and a lot of joy and success I was having at Westfield. But I made the move, and that's where I am today. So that kind of that happened in 2022, and through that journey, it opened some things up. We can talk about that, where I just decided if I was gonna make something like this big of a career change, my mind was now opening up to what else in my life out there that I've thought about doing or wanted to do, um, that I could start to think differently about. And one of them was this inertia of legacy concept, and the other was music and just different things. I just decided to kind of tackle it and start to minimize my what ifs list.
So you and I are kindred spirits, I think, to some degree, because you've done a lot of different things, man. And it's one of the things that I think for me helps me a lot at the point of sale, or even, you mentioned it, going to the different places where we may go speak or whatever, just relating to people and being able to share life experiences and find common ground relatively quickly. But there's always a subset of people that I come into contact with. It's like, man, what job haven't you done? Or where haven't you been? And I mean, I think part of it has to do with the way I'm wired and just having a natural curiosity to understand how things work or to be able to experience things. So I am the type of guy that if you're saying, "Hey man, I'm going to pour a concrete deck behind my house this afternoon and I need some help. Would you mind come helping me?" Yeah, I've never done that before. I'll come over and help you pour a concrete deck, and at some point in a sales conversation down the road, I'm going to talk about the time. "Oh yeah, I know what you guys do. I did this, blah 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 blah." And over a long, I'm 51 now. So yeah, I've got a lot of life experience, but I think that bodes well for us in our careers if we know how to channel it. I'm interested from your perspective. I mean, to go to school for, graphic design and then end up being, because you were head of distribution at one point for Westfield, right? Like those are two, from my perspective, very polar opposite things. And I would also think that for people, and I want to be careful to preface this the right way. I think that if I were to look at a stereotypical person that would be head of distribution for an insurance company, a guy that had a degree in graphic design that came that path probably wouldn't be where I would expect you to come from. I think that's probably a fair assessment. Me sitting in my chair looking at things objectively, though, I think that people who are more creatively wired are refreshing to the industry because we can look at ways to solve problems inside of a framework that's existed for a long time, but people really haven't pushed the envelope and tried to, be creative in how they solve problems. And that some of that comes from my time in retail when I was working with Super Target. I'm always quick to talk about what a great company from a training and development standpoint Target is. And one of the things that made them very successful is they have a common practice for literally everything. You go in there, there's racks in every section of the store with trifold brochures. And if you want to know how to do a process that's part of your job and you forgot how to do it or you're new, you can get that trifold brochure and it is going to walk you. Now, this is going back a long time, so it's probably electronic now. But at that time, you could open it up and it would tell you exactly what to do. And I used to tell people because part of my job was going to broken stores and fixing them when they had problems with their processes. And it was very easy to identify who wasn't on common practice because we knew common practice worked. That's why it was common practice. But human nature gets in and everybody wants to be, figure out a better way to do it. I always used to tell my team that I think that people who say creativity is thinking outside the box is a cop out. I think that's the easy way. I think the better way to explain what it would be like to operate in Target's environment or inside the insurance industry would be to say that rather than thinking outside the box, creativity is staying inside the confines of the rules that we're required to follow, but finding a new and different way to do something. And that way there's still that level of structure that you have to follow, but you're free to stay inside that and brainstorm that way instead of just everything being the Wild West. So that's a long way for me to get to the question of when you were in your role in company operations, how do you feel that you were prepared for that? Or how do you feel like that creative side of you helped you excel in that role?
Well, that's man, there's so much in that, and
Didn't mean to go deep on the first question, Chris, but
no,
so I
it's all right.
started.
I mean, because there's some of that is woven through the book, and some of the ideas of things can happen to you, and the amount of preparation or thought or clarity you have around who you are, what you want to be, can help position you for those things, or not. But the idea around a creative working in an industry that is largely populated by excellent underwriters, people who are actuaries, the claims environment, which is this is exactly what the policy said, and this is the coverage that's afforded, um, has had start fits and stops, I suppose, if you will. And there have been times where the way I think about, quite candidly, has been very welcome and even celebrated and given me great opportunities. And been times where I know that I frustrated others, and frustrated myself, and things just didn't work. So it was always this balance between, this will sound like I'm being a little bit arrogant, but the number of times I got invited to work on projects, even young, somewhat couched with this, hey, we really want to have Chris because he brings a fresh set of
I
eyes
don't
to
think
come.
that's arrogant at all, man. I think that's something that our industry specifically needs a lot more of, right? I mean, if we're going to push forward, we need to stop getting people that are just lemmings going over the side of the fjords and figure out a different way to do things. And, I think it's probably part of the reason why we have the stigma that we do from the outside a lot of the times is, insurance people, bankers, we're just very rigid. We're in financial services sector. And then people start talking to you and they're like, wow, man, you guys are actually pretty cool. But this is a
That's
fun
right.
industry. But, I think that we have done a lot of things that have prohibited us from achieving the maximum humanization of what we do as opposed to it just being starch, dress shirt, suit. You even alluded to it when we were
Yeah.
talking ahead of time, back in the old days when it was the dark, very conservative. You couldn't just wear any suit. It had to be navy, charcoal, or whatever, white shirt and a Brooks Brothers rep tie. That was about as far as you could push it.
I'll tell you, I mean, 23 years old, fine art degree, first day on the job, I'm wearing wingtips. That is not exactly what most of my peers were doing
Right,
when they started their
exactly.
first job. But I guess I want to come back to that because one of the things I had to learn, and I think it's part of this journey that we're all on, is having a certain set of skills that people want to take advantage of or are trying to figure out how to take advantage of is one thing. We all then have to figure out how to how to find our way along. So bringing creativity and pushing the envelope and those kind of things, like it will continually be a journey for my own into how hard to push. Is it offensive? Where does it fit? And I was very fortunate at a couple of key junctures in my career, and usually they were long chunks of time. So maybe that says something around what an amazing leader and an amazing mentor will do. So I worked for two different people at big chunks of my time who whatever it was in their own mind, they recognized that there was something different about what I could bring to the team. And they gave the latitude for that to develop while also being the right leader and coach I needed to learn other things. And so, being in an insurance industry and being a part of an underwriting leadership team, I still had to learn about how rates were made, about rate filings, around the deep issues of the coverage form and what product attributes mean. And what's it like when an agent starts to call and yell that they don't like the answer their underwriter gave them? I mean, you can't always get through that with creativity. You've got to understand and have your chops oriented. So balancing all those things together was amazing. And then in my last role, you mentioned being on the senior leadership group that helped with distribution. My leader there, Craig Welsh, I'll give him a shout, was wonderful in giving an environment to go learn that discipline while also sort of be who I am and have some opportunity to help build the team out in that regard. So finding your long, unless you're running your own shop, you've got to figure out a way to take these unique skills, even if they're fringy or if they're right in the middle of the bell curve, and have them sit inside the organization and work for to better maximize it. But one of the things I think that gets, at least with me, sometimes the words become conflated, and creativity can sometimes be this very ambiguous word. And what does that actually look like? And you mentioned like it's understanding the box and thinking differently from within inside the box or the confines. Maybe it's the graphic design orientation. I like to come back around to thinking about it as a design problem,
Mm.
which implies creativity, but design, this is where it sort of aligns with the notion of the book, but design starts with some sort of an intention. And so we had a professor in art school who, whenever we would get like really off the rails and super get creative with our graphic design, he would remind us that the number one goal of a graphic designer is to get your client's message read. And so you can be creative and you can do that in very unique ways and understand. But it got me thinking about the fact that that starts with an intention. And I started to think about that differently. And I need to understand what that message is so that whatever level of problem solving through the lens of creativity I would bring to that was actually aligned with what the message was and who it was intended to reach. And I think that's a slightly different nuance on creativity than what people think about, but I think that can still open up a very, very broad and a new set of ways of thinking about common problems.
So let me ask you, when you made the transition out of the carrier side and into what I would think, I don't know, I'm not even going to say what I would think because I don't know. I've never been in that role before. What was that like leaving the carrier side where you had been for so long and
Yeah.
moved into working with the big I at a national basis? What was that like for you?
Very eye-opening and liberating in some regards. And then because I'll say this. So part of the reason why I was, I guess, even open to I guess you'd call it a recruiting call. When Ron was calling, was I had over the years through different roles become incredibly passionate about the independent agency channel And in my last role in distribution, I had a lot of opportunities to work on things that were like industry level, working with different state associations and getting to know some of the leading consultancies in the organization. And I was fascinated by what it was like and was being asked to come participate as somebody who was learning those things. Um, and agencies would love to talk to you about that. But what I found is that you can only affect so much change at the industry level. I was, through a carrier, and that's probably true of any carrier or any one company. But what was interesting to me, and as I was learning and having relationships with state and national big I, is they sat at the middle of it, and they were by design neutral and agnostic. And agents looked to them to be their resource. And so that was really fascinating to think about taking this passion I was having for trying to be a broader part of an industry. And there was an organization that sat in a role where they were trusted and sought after and viewed as an advocate for the channel. And now, when I was interacting with agents or carriers or the technology companies, like I do in this case, I I don't really have a bias other than is it good for independent agencies? And that gives me a different way of thinking about learning, a different way of thinking about some of the bias that I might have had just because of the things I was accountable for and the results that a carrier needs to manage and govern to. So it really opened my mind to a different way of thinking, and had forced me through some areas where I had to challenge some of my own biases, some of which I think confirmed, and others, kind of gave me a different way of thinking about things.
So we're at Inertia of Legacy. You're in the role. I've got to believe that part of that has to do, like, when you get into your new role, you're not in graphic design anymore. There's probably a piece of you that's missing, that you got to fulfill that creative side. And I see the stuff that you put out on social with the deep cut Skinner, recordings of you with the guitars and all of that. But I also have to believe that part of the issue with um getting the book out has to do with getting what's up here onto paper and doing it in a way that's going to feed that part of you that wants to have that creative side be part of who you are today, in addition to what you've become over time as we all change.
Yeah, there's a lot to that, and I'm exploring that in the next book as like sort of an anecdote to bring some points together. And so one of the things that I mean, I went to school to be a graphic designer, but I started college to be a mechanical engineer. So there's sort of always been this juxtaposition or this sort of ebbing and flowing of like creativity and desire to do things differently in the arts, and then like super mechanical type things and tactical and tangible type things. And I think what happened was through all of the years, because I was a great deal of enjoyment of the things I got to learn and do on the carrier side, and I would sketch and draw and do different types of things in my own life. But I'm trying to think about timing now, considering how long it's been. But for a handful of years in front of COVID, the creative itch, I guess, if you would. I don't even know if I would call it creativity, but the desire to learn and to think very differently about things was really starting to come to fruition. And I re-immersed myself in my interest and passion around science. And I was, I mean, gosh, book was released in 23. I left to make this move in 22. So probably 17 or 18, David, that era, maybe 2016. I started to have this idea that scientific or mathematics principles that we might be familiar with, if we understood them and thought about them differently, so maybe that's the creative bent, that there was a way of taking those things and pulling the principles out them and deploying them as ways to think about our personal or professional development or ways of leading our businesses. And so I started to draw and write and journal around what those might be as I would listen to podcasts or read or whatever. And what was happening then is through that time, I started to realize our industry, insurance, had procured the word legacy, much like the software industry had. And whether it was intentional or not, the utilization started to generate a negative connotation. So when you hear legacy carrier or a legacy piece of software or a legacy agency or a
You're
legacy
one foot out
leader,
the door, basically.
yeah, you start to think about, okay, been around for a long time, probably not fresh, probably not willing to embrace new ideas and change. And I had an independent agent do the fist on the table thing and said, don't call me a legacy agency. And we had a really great conversation, and it motivated me to behave a little bit differently. And somewhere in that journey, I was trying to think about how do you stop using legacy in a negative way? Because I always thought about it as a positive thing. And just maybe somewhat dumb luck or prophetically, I was real geekdom here, reading about or listening about something where it was just kind of revisiting Newton's contribution to the world via Newton's laws. And it hit me like if I if I don't do anything differently, nothing's going to change. So Newton's first law says an object at rest stays at rest, or an object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by another force. So if I don't like something that's moving, I can be an external force, or I can do it internally, or I can do it at a broader level. And so I used to commute an hour each way, and usually in the dark based on the work days. And somewhere along the way, it hit me that we can be the inertia of our own legacy. And that's really where the idea came. But I didn't really think about it as a book. To me, it was just this idea that was bouncing around in my head. And I was having a hard time sort of putting it together. But I kept journaling on it. And some people in the industry that will be watching, I'm certain many of them know Ryan Hanley. He wrote the foreword for the book on some level because he's Ryan Hanley. But because what most people wouldn't don't realize is Ryan Hanley is the first human being I said the words inertia of legacy to. So we were at one of the industry events, and we might have walked across the street from the place to get
Well,
uh,
the other thing is too, man, Hanley's the kind of guy that you could say inertia of legacy, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I get it." Like you might not even have had to go on and explain it to him, right? I'm sure you did, but he's also somebody that's very open-minded, pushing the envelope, not afraid to challenge the status quo, you know. So I'm interested in that conversation. Proceed, sir.
well, that's it. So,
Especially since Ryan's a good friend and we have had many. It's so funny because when he launched Rogue Risk, it
yeah,
was almost like I didn't even have to set an alarm on my phone. We had a text thread every single morning between 5 and 5:15
that's
going
all.
back and forth, with he's asking questions, I'm asking him questions, he's giving me ideas, I'm pushing back. And at some point when things started to catch a little bit, my wife's like, what happened to Ryan? We're not talking to Ryan at 5 o'clock in the morning anymore because she'd lay with her back facing me, face the other direction, trying to sleep for a couple hours, and I'm
That's
already up
awesome.
and getting after it. So I'm always keen to hear on a Hanley rap session for sure.
Well, it's interesting then. So, somewhat counterintuitively, and it was again, I doesn't matter what event we were, but we had both done our speaking engagements, and um, we just went to get dinner, right? And we were chatting about stuff. And when you, one of the things that Ryan and I do is we love to talk about like these grander sort of fringe intellectual kind of things. And what do you
I'm
want to do when
familiar.
what do you want to be when you grow up, dude? Whatever, that kind of thing. And so I shared this whole concept with him. And at first he goes, dude, what? I don't get it. Like, what? And it forced me to put it together.
No
And
kidding.
I don't, it wasn't like I don't get it. Maybe I was like, wait, maybe he was just challenging me to keep going. But it was such a great conversation, and it got me in real time with somebody who I respect, who I know thinks very differently than many of the other folks that you interact with in and around this industry. And um, it really helped put some crystallization to it. And at that point, what do you want to do with it? What do you want to do with it? And the brainstorm then was, I mean, because at this point in time, I was still, carrier, leader and doing the thing over there. I thought, man, it'd be kind of cool if I could just put enough of this together to do a 1 hour keynote at a few things, just maybe on the sides. Um, and it just kind of sat and simmered. It really never in my mind went to, is it a book? Does it become a business? Does it become sort of the foundation for a consulting practice or whatever that looks like? And so it was after I made the move where I was just starting to go back and revisit some of these things. Because David, what I'm missing is if anybody's read the book or when you do, there's a big chunk of the book around the inertia of legacy matrix, which is an XY axis that takes the concept of inertia and legacy and plots. I mean, with it, and the way I describe it, every single human being or business is in one of those four quadrants, if you go at this from an open mind. I didn't have that. And my fear was, or maybe I was using it as an excuse, but I felt like this was something that was largely esoteric. And if one of the smartest people that I know, who also is sort of aligned around the way I think, took an hour over a beer to understand it or for me to be able to explain it, then I couldn't just dump it into a book and have it go. But that I continued to kind of gyrate on it. And quite honestly, this is, these sounds like, these things that, artists say it came to them in a dream and they were just called to do something. It's true. I had started with the big I in like spring of 22. I'd taken Thanksgiving week off. It was just vacation. And that Sunday night before Thanksgiving week, I was sitting in my chair. And my wife's, "What are you going to do? You got any plans?" We weren't going on vacation. And I said, "I think I'm going to write." And Monday morning, woke up early, flipped up my laptop in my chair with a cup of coffee, and wrote like 8,000 words that day. And over the course of that week, I think I wrote 20 or 25 hours, and that became the book. And it's an interesting thing. And we talk about design and having intent. There's also something about don't wait until you have it all to take action.
Right.
And so I didn't have that quadrant, but I knew somewhere inside me this thing was ready to go. And I was probably 10 or 15 hours into writing this book before my hand just started drawing the quadrant and what it
Mm.
meant and how the concepts came together. And so I mean, there's something about go be your own inertia. That's the kind of the rallying cry I through the book, which I admit is a liberalization on what inertia is, but that's the thing. Like you got to take action. You got to have a vision, have clarity about what you want to be and go. And if you deploy intentional focus and energy to something, um, first of all, you're more likely to succeed it and to have it accomplish it, but you're also in a better position to sort of fend off external forces that might keep you from getting there. So it was really kind of a fascinating creative process that started with just a bunch of notes and scribbles and a concept, a beer with a buddy, and here we are today. I mean, great feedback from people who are reading it, and now kind of kicking over into what the next one would be. Because I mean, think about this: like a few years ago, I wasn't even intending to write a book. Now I'm writing the second in a series. So it's mind numbing to me. Mind numbing to me.
So you spent the 25 to 28 hours getting all of it out. Having written a couple of books myself, I understand at least how I went about that process. How much refining did it take after that before this thing was ready to go? That's the first thing I was going to say. Then the other one I was sort of chuckling when you were talking about how it came to you and you had put together the axis and everything. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, well, look how far we've come in a couple of years, because now Chris wouldn't even have to do that. He could just paste the text into Chat GPT and prompt it to create the Cartesian coordinate plane for him to build the X and Y axis and all of this stuff. It would honestly, if from my perspective, it would be interesting to see if you could actually replicate it or what it would create compared to what you wanted it to look like now, to see what that looks like. But I mean, it's just, even thinking about, as I've written books over the course of me doing that, it's changed how I've gone about that process. So you may or may not have heard me share this story. I don't remember if I talked about it when I was in Columbus or not, but my next book, I've been fairly vocal about it, is actually a daily sales reader for producers. It'll have 365 just vignettes. You can go in, here's a challenging thing to think about for the day. But I've been writing it in real time, because what I'm doing is, when my son came, if there's one thing I feel like I'm really, really good at, I can get like 5 things out of one thing. I look at something and I'm like, okay, I can get all this different content. And that's one of the reasons why I'm able to push so much out to the internet, is because I'm a big fan of taking a big piece and chopping it up into a little bunch of little pieces. This is different. So when Grayson got his license and was going to start producing, I told him, I'm like, you're riding to work with me every day. Why don't you just ask me a question and I'll answer it? We can record it. We can put it out as a short and then link back to longer form video or a website or whatever else. And I said, some people will get into it. It was really when TikTok was starting to go up and the YouTube shorts were blowing up and Instagram Reels was the new medium for communicating with the next generation. And it took off. Carpool Closer did really, really well from a gaining a momentum standpoint. But as we were doing it, I'm like, you know what, man? We can do 180 some of these with me answering the questions, and then we can flip the camera around and I can ask you the questions to see whether or not you know answers to questions, because by the time we get there, you'll have some experience under your belt. But as we were doing these, we were taking the video and making that transcription, pushing it into Dropbox, and that's going to be the foundation of the daily sales reader. Is we're just going to have 365 Carpool Closer questions that were answered that we've now repackaged, put into a book format. I can expound on it a little bit, but then another iteration of that would be, okay, we could actually turn this into an audio version, whether it be an audio book or even a daily podcast that drops, where now it's a 10 or 15 minute thing instead of just reading it. Here's some real world application. Here's some challenges I've faced. Think about some things you've run into. And all of that stemmed from a drive to work, having a conversation with my son, you know?
Isn't that awesome? Yeah, it's crazy. Well, in the availability of media, in the mechanisms to deliver content, I mean, gosh, it's not even worth saying out loud. It's changed the way we all do business every single day, and the way we consume content. And it's fascinating to see how pervasive that's been, and largely in a good way. But you mentioned AI, right? Like in my day job, um, I'm trying to provide a balanced approach, for the industry and how to think about it, right? Not everything that's awesome comes without consequences or, risk on the other side. But, I mean, in many ways, I'm largely bullish on AI and the capabilities it has for our the industry to be more effective in a gazillion different ways. As an old school artist, like the next book I'm writing, like this is me, man. This is notebooks and scribbles and having the stuff laid out. Like my office, you can't see this now. My office desk here is a 1950s era drafting table
Oh, that's
that
fantastic.
my dad gave me when I was in middle school when he was an engineer. And so like I'm just the whole vibe that comes from here. I got like a 60s era school desk next to me. It's like there's something that's to me about this like just super rewarding about I'm using a laptop and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth
Yeah, but I
speakers
get it.
too. But
You're
yeah,
blending a little bit, but then if you take that to the other extreme, you've got somebody like me who's like all in on anything I can do from a productivity standpoint.
yeah,
And I don't know if you may or may not have seen some of the things I've shared. I've not shared a ton, but we're in the process now of I had a custom avatar of myself
saw
created
that.
with my voice cloned. And so to give you an example of how we're using that, also to share with the audience, because I don't even know that I've talked about it on the podcast, but like with Killing Commercial, I do a call every Wednesday at 1 o'clock Eastern that goes for an hour. And it's usually on a really focused topic. But again, you can only get through something so much in an hour. And the reality is I do run an agency. I do produce business. I can't go into a call like that and have it be, like an actual lesson plan with a million pieces of collateral to download or whatever else. It's conversational discussion, idea based, all of that stuff. But what we've been able to do now is I record that call. I have my Otter AI assistant in there. So when it's done, we capture the summary of what the call was about, the keywords we need to be using when we create content around it, and all of that. Then I'll take the full transcript and put it in and ask ChatGPT to create an outline for a long form blog post based on the content of the transcript. And then I'll have it actually write that post at about a 2,000 word count and then make that the recap so that when people who weren't able to be on the call live go into the community, they can start with the summary and say, I'm good here. I don't really need to read anything else or listen to anything. Or maybe their interest is picked and they have to go and spend 3 to 5 minutes reading the full recap to say, okay, this makes sense. This is something I really want to know more about. Let me listen to the call for an hour. Now we've taken that and we can take all of that information and use ChatGPT to create a 15 lesson course on that topic, give us the outline for it, give us the homework assignments in addition to the video scripts, and the extra downloads that you can use to actually do your planning and execution on the topic. So like this last Wednesday, we did a call on overcoming objections at the point of sale. And the next morning, we had an entire course built out that's probably 3 to 4 hours worth of stuff of my avatar, my voice, but all of the collateral, everything's done. And it was done literally in a matter of an hour to an hour and a half worth of work on my
Yeah,
end. But then now it's getting, it has to go through and get branded and get the graphics and everything on there so that the messaging and all that stuff's consistent. But now every single time, not only are we having that call, but we can turn it into going so much deeper. So,
yep.
niches, trade shows, overcoming objections. I did one yesterday because I was on a coaching call and somebody said we should really do one on telemarketing and overcoming objections on the phone. Done. It was done before I left the office yesterday because I can put my prompts in and let ChatGPT do its thing. All it's doing is reorganizing my words and putting it into a logical format so that we can distribute it the right way. But I mean, I look at it from the perspective of I never would have done this. Like, there's no chance I would have done that if I had to record every one of those videos, create all of
Yeah,
this
my
stuff.
gosh.
But if I can get what's up here out somewhere and then let that AI take it and organize it and make it logical so that it flows the right way, then I'm going to do that 10 out of 10 times. And everybody that's in my community benefits from that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, the tools are just spectacular. And it's a fascinating thing. I'm a part of a few authors and indie author groups on social media, and
You don't ever have anybody reaching out to you cold on LinkedIn asking you to boost your book sales, right? Nobody ever does that, I'm sure.
no, gosh, no. But yeah, my gosh, same thing in the music groups I'm in, right? I mean, everybody's going to make you famous. But the topic of the day and all the indie author groups is AI, right? And it's a great debate. And there's really old school folks and there's new school folks, and um, probably in the right or wrong answer. And we're all kind of growing through this together. But it's not going away, and it's going to make our lives different in so many different ways. It's fantastic to think about what the possibilities could look like, and maybe even a little bit scary at times too. But
So let me ask you
every
this, man, because I think this is a question we haven't hit on. And I know that when you sit down to write, at least from my perspective, my first book, Extra 2 Minutes, something I've always believed, always felt, comes from being in customer service intensive retail industry all the way up through my career here. And I felt like this is a message that I think would make a difference in a lot of people's lives that maybe just didn't follow the same path that I did, that I can open their eyes to say, you could do it this way, but if you just spent 2 more minutes and did it this way, you're going to make a much greater impact than the person who did it over here. And originally it was like, let me get all of this out. But as I was writing it, I started to think to myself, who is this book really for? Meaning, who do I see? And this is part of the producer in me coming out too, I guess. Who's my ideal prospect for my book? Meaning, if somebody picks this up and reads it, who's this going to have the most impact on? So that's my question to you. As you think about the Inertia of Legacy, and now that you had a chance to, like, it's been out for a year and a half, and you reflect back, who is the book for?
That's a great question, and I don't think I had a super refined answer when I was writing it, because a lot of it was trying to connect these weird ideas in my own brain in a cohesive way. I'm going to answer that question in some level, the lens of how I'm getting feedback from people who've read it. And what I have found is that uh, small businesses who are maybe just trying to think a little differently about like the strategic planning and what that looks like. I've had some interesting conversations with people who run smaller businesses inside and outside the insurance industry who, quite candidly, one of the conversations, a little tired of the traditional mission, vision statement, and strategic document. And so this book gave them motivation to bring their small team together and have a conversation about what they really want the business to be, how they're going to create activities, they think it looks like today, what the barriers are to get there, those kind of things, through a different vocabulary and a different way. So it's almost like we're going to put on costumes and role play. So that's been really fascinating. But a lot of like high-end individual contributors to junior, like mid-level leaders have really the conversations have been great there too, because it's gotten them to really think about where they are in their career path and what that might look like, and maybe how they've lost their mojo at times, and how that can have an impact on the legacy they're trying to build and leave, and give them some energy to think forward. But I just random people too, like holy cow, I never really thought I was just going through the motions in my life and kind of living Groundhog Day every single day. And this got me thinking differently. And so that's a broad answer. So basically covered the entire population of the universe. But I, I hoped that it would do that. But the number of people I've talked to who have challenged and had an open conversation around thinking of the word legacy as something that you can define, manage, and leave, and you're doing that in real time through your life. It's not something that happens as a conversation upon death. And that with that mindset and understanding that these quadrants are not permanent locations, and they're not a permanent blue ribbon, and they're not a permanent purgatory, depending on where you are. But by understanding them and understanding that with intention and effort, you can wrap your arms about what you want to be. And if that's limited to a very small slice of the world, it's focused on your family, it's focused on a couple of buddies, great. If you lead a multi-million dollar organization, you can be working on that in real time, and there's a mindset and a framework to do it. So it's become really interesting as folks have almost had the awareness that this has allowed them to think about legacy in a way that, huh, I can I can have an influence over what that is when I'm gone, even if it's to two or three people, or if it's to millions. And so it's kind of wild to think about. So there hasn't been this observable, like, oh, okay, this is the group that really has found the most from the book. It's just been all over the board.
I think you wrote the book the right way, if you ask me. I mean, the reality is, man, I feel like if you were to figure out who your audience was and try and write the book to that audience, you're limiting your ability to think and the ability to be creative and push it out. But if you don't limit that ability and you write the book as if you're writing it for yourself, the number of people that you're going to attract that you may not otherwise would probably be somewhat mind boggling. And it goes back to something I tell people all the time when I discuss content creation with them. Just even if you're doing digital advertising to build brand awareness or whatever, for yourself as a producer or for your agency, right from the heart, be consistent in putting out content, and your audience will always find you no matter what. If you're just consistent and you keep putting things out there, the people that are supposed to find you will. And I realize that that's, not trackable necessarily. And, from a business perspective, maybe that's a little bit more freeform than what the average person would like. But the reality is, man, it's been proven time and time again. And the example that I use with people is I very rarely on my personal LinkedIn profile share anything at all Florida Risk Partners. It's almost usually producer education, agency growth, something along those lines. Yet every single month, I get a couple inbox messages from CFOs or CEOs of middle market companies from across the country that say, David, love the content you put out teaching other agents how to do what you do. We are not happy where we're at. And we wanted to know if you or someone you know that does business the way you do could meet with us to talk about you representing us moving forward, because this is a fresh way of thinking. What? Like, I had no intention
What?
whatsoever of you being the one to receive the message, yet here we are.
No, that
And I
makes
think
total
that's the
sense.
thing, man. If you just get your thoughts out on paper and you're not trying to please a specific group or necessarily please anybody, the people that your message resonates with are going to attract to you, and then it's going to multiply through them. And you don't need to worry about it. Just sit down and continue thinking and getting your thoughts out on paper and let everybody else do the work for you.
Well, I'll tell you, and I know we're kind of running up against time here, but one of the things you mentioned when like right from your heart and the people that will find it will, I heard a quote from Dave Grohl, and I've had, this is an interesting conversation too, but is are books and written content art? I tend to believe they are. But, you think about Dave Grohl and as a musician, he has a quote that said the great thing about art, or, in this case, music, is that you can sing one song to 100,000 people and they will sing it back to you for 100,000 different reasons. And
Mm,
so most cases, the songs that an artist would write or would be, I mean, art because it was something he was feeling and a story he needed to tell. And take the song Everlong, which is pretty popular. I mean, obviously it's a love song, but boy, when you start to talk to people about the nuances of a relatively simple set of lyrics, the way it relates to people's different, and that's what's happening here. And so having conversations with, boy, I disagree when you said this, or I loved when you said that, or this is how it got me thinking differently about my career or my business or whatever it was. I mean, I think that aligns with what you're saying. And so I'm usually not a fan of like shoot and holler crap, but in this case, I was doing it for me, and that sounds
mhm.
selfish, but it resonated. And so it's a little bit of a different mindset now, knowing that people might have an expectation that the next book does something, but I hope it'll probably do something different.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, listen, as we wrap up, I'm going to tell everybody, ask Chris who the book is for. I'm going to tell you it's for at least 12 people that will follow my instructions. There are a lot of you that don't get books. And part of the reason why is because you don't give me your shipping address when you send me the email. So that's on you, not me. But for the first 12 people who email David at killingcommercial.com and in the subject line, one word, inertia, that's all I need, and then give me your name and your mailing address in the body of the email and hit the send button. Of course, if you want to share thoughts or have questions, you can do that too. But for purposes of getting the book, inertia in the subject line, name and mailing address in the body, David at killingcommercial.com. And for the first 12 people, we will get those out. I'm going to buy them the second that we get off of recording this podcast. So, with that being said, Chris, how do they get a hold of you? If people get the book and they say, you know what, this guy's all wet, or you know what, I really love everything this guy said, I want to reach out and, just sort of find out more. How can they engage with you? What's the best way?
I mean, LinkedIn's really easy. It's pretty straight. I mean, I'm just my first name, last name on LinkedIn. On Instagram, I hang out over there. I do some other stuff, book stuff, music stuff, lifelong BMX racer. My handle over there is Chris Cline 26 BMX. So I love to interact with folks that I know a lot through my professional realm. If we share some personal things, so like LinkedIn and Instagram are great ways. If you feel compelled to shoot me a message on any of those, we can get emails swapped or phone numbers swapped, because one of the things that I just love is to take big, deep, esoteric, philosophical conversations about almost anything. Um, I learn as much as I could ever share, and it means a great deal to me.
That's a good mindset, man. Well, listen, I appreciate you carving time out today. Been a great conversation. Certainly will not be the last. I have a feeling we could get into every bit as deep a conversations as you do with Hanley. So
Oh yeah.
we'll make sure that happens. But I did want to thank you again for coming on today and wish you nothing but the best. Everybody, if you want the book, send me the email. We'll make it happen. Otherwise, we'll catch you guys next time. See ya.